Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for some this evening, for some this afternoon. I'm Katie Scott from the National Homelessness Law Center. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Youth Homelessness Director at the Law Center. And we just wanted to start by introducing each member of our team, giving them a chance to kind of explain why they come to this work, why it's important to them. Um, I grew up as a white kid in the suburbs, surrounded by a bunch of other white kids in the suburbs. And I ended up attending Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, where I was really exposed to rural poverty and homelessness for the first time. And it is definitely true that that completely shifted my perspective, my worldview, and really sort of the course of my career. And ever since then, I've been involved in efforts to end homelessness in a variety of different ways. I ended up in Seattle, Washington, which is where I still am. I went to law school at University of Washington and got involved with the Street Youth Legal Advocates of Washington, first as a law student volunteer and eventually as their staff attorney and executive director. And with that group, provided direct representation to homeless youth and young adults in the Seattle area. And then after you keep doing the same types of cases over and over again, you start to think, okay, there's a systems problem here. And so I'm really excited to be at the Law Center to be able to really think deeply about some of those systemic issues and have the time to do that. And I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So now I'll pass it on to Aaliyah.
Thanks so much, Katie. Hi, everyone. First, I just want to say hello and thank you so much for being here to learn more about the Youth State Index and our website and index revamp. We sincerely appreciate it. My name is Aaliyah Jones, she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Policy Officer at True Colors United. This is my third year working on the state index, and I feel most proud of this version of the work. So again, thank you for being here. I also want to shout out the wonderful index team, present and past, for making this vision possible. And thank you to all of the youth and young adults who contributed to our revamp process. And shout out to Gabby for reminding us to stay human-centered in this work. In honor of her, I want to share a bit about my why with you all. I recently wrote a blog post paying tribute to my Nana in heaven, and I want to share some of that with you today. If you want to read the full blog post, it's also on the website. So my Nana, a Black woman born and bred in Five Points, Denver, Colorado, where I'm from, fought to protect her community of people living in the Denver housing projects for more than 5 decades. She was relentless in her drive towards equity and inclusion, protecting people living off of social welfare systems, urging developers to embrace people experiencing poverty as peers, not projects, and taught her children and grandchildren to do the same. My advocacy career has in large part followed the activism work of my Nana and my aunties and all the people in my family who were dealt a hand of discrimination and inequity simply because they're Black, queer, or poor. I joined the team at True Colors United because of my own experiences navigating this country as a mixed Black queer woman, desperately wanting to change the systems and environments that oppress so many of us simply because of who we are. As we envision a future where all young people thrive and have the power to shape their own lives, let us remember the tireless work of our ancestors who fought for our safety, liberation, autonomy, and power. I appreciate you all for listening to a bit about my story and learning more about me. And I will now pass it on to the lovely and wonderful Erica.
Thanks so much, Aaliyah. Hi, everyone. My name's Erica Lopez. I use she, her pronouns. I've been the communications associate on the youth team at the Law Center for just shy of 2 years. I am currently located in Albany, New York. As a child, I experienced different forms of food and housing insecurity, as well as homelessness with my mother in California. My family was also impacted by several systems, including the criminal justice system. These experiences brought me to this work and inform how I think and talk about these important issues. I think the most exciting part about the new index and the work that we did last year was the working group sessions that we hosted. The contributions and stories from the directly impacted youth and young adults that we worked with were absolutely invaluable to the process. And I'm really, really excited to share the fruit of all of our labor with you. Next, we go to Jeremy.
Thank you, Erica. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy Penn. I use they, them, or she, her pronouns, and I am the youth homelessness attorney at the National Homelessness Law Center with Katie and Erica. I am originally from South Jersey, outside of Philly, so I do not know how to pump gas. And I now live in Washington, D.C., occupied Piscataway land. I come to this work through abolition and racial justice and gender justice work. And well, you all were saying, we did this webinar yesterday, but it gave me the idea to share an anecdote that actually is from the last month. So my queer parent, Shelby Juarez, and I have been reconnecting a lot recently. And this is the person who is like my chosen family. And I was taken by just how lucky I am. And I shared this with Shelby, that I, the descendant of folks who fled violence and persecution on a different continent, the descendant of folks who have been doing that for 2,000 years, as a Jewish person, get to be here and get to be loved by someone who is the child of an immigrant, whose family is descended from the indigenous peoples of this continent, and that our ancestors, a very, very long time ago, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, were schismed, were separated by each other, from each other, by the breaking of a land bridge. And here we are today, and we, through bad things and through good things, get to be together and love each other. And so that's the kind of thing that brings me to this work. And so I'm very excited to be here and very excited for our presentation today. And oh, I didn't cry yesterday, but that might make me cry today, so I'm going to pass the mic to Katie. I'm so excited for what we have in store for you guys. Welcome all of you to our very wonderful new and improved state index on youth homelessness.
Thanks so much, Jeremy, for sharing all that. It's awesome. I want to note that we have some other folks you might see on the panel here. One, John, I will be introducing later in the presentation. And then also let me just shout out and give a big thanks to Timothy Hale from True Colors United, who is driving this car as we go through the presentation. All right, we can go to the next slide. So new looks, new metrics, new scoring. I think I'm going to start just sort of briefly explaining a little bit about the new metrics and kind of why we decided to move from our sort of previous set of 60 metrics to a new set of over 100 metrics. One thing I'll sort of point out kind of initially is that Jeremy will talk about this later in the presentation, but part of our theory of change is that homelessness is primarily a housing problem, and our state index on youth homelessness did not have any housing metrics. And we realized that if we were really going to get to the root of where youth homelessness comes from, we're going to have to look at housing policy. And so that was our guess as we started to go through this process, but then that was confirmed, and Aaliyah will talk about it even more. But just from our youth and young adult focus groups, we did start off with a question on housing, so that it's natural that the conversation would go that way. But I think we were blown away by how much housing, accessing it, maintaining it, the habitability of it, the accessibility of it, just like how deep that conversation went, and how how it was a thread through all of our focus groups. So, we really came out of that knowing like we need to rebalance this index in a way that's reflective of what the cause of homelessness is. And so our new metrics, about half of them are focused exclusively on housing policy. The rest are kind of a mix of some of our, old metrics, a bit reworked, but things that might affect, particularly like youth who are homeless, so under 18, about consent laws and things like that. So we have kind of a mix and a balance there. Um, and, kind of on the same page, we realized as far as the new scoring that the previous version of the index was very limited in that we sort of had a metric and then there was a yes or no answer, like, does the state match this or does it not? And what it wasn't able to do was sort of reflect the nuance that we were seeing in a variety of different policies that unhoused young people are interacting with. And so for our new scoring, we essentially have a range where we can go from as low as -1 up to a +2 for each particular metric. Um, the other kind of interesting thing about that is we also decided to move away from like ranking the states. Obviously, you can see, on the website, the score for each state. If you really wanted to, you could make a little spreadsheet with those scores in the states and rank them yourself. But for us, it was really important that the focus move away from comparing yourself, like each state comparing themselves to another state, and rather looking at what those opportunities and gaps are in your particular jurisdiction. And so, we obviously like the maximum possible score with our current metrics is a 94.5. I think the highest score that we have at this point is a 45, and that's California. The minimum possible score is a -24.5, and we do have some states that are in the negative right now. A lot of that has to do with violent policies against LGBTQ youth. Um, so we'll take a look at that when we look through our set of metrics a little later in the presentation. But just understanding that even though right now that's kind of the scoring range that we have, this is intended now to be a living document and website. So it's not going to stay the same. As things change throughout the legislative session, if new laws get passed, we're able to update it in real time rather than putting out like a separate index each year. So hopefully when you visit the website, it should be as updated and accurate, as close to real time as possible. We will let you know and on our bibliographies, when things are last updated. But also just the fact that we know that there are metrics that we're missing, like we haven't even gotten a chance to get to like homelessness services, and sort of the laws around that. And so that's something that we're going to be, embarking on this year of adding those kinds of metrics. And so we'll be able to add those in. That'll be incorporated into the scoring system. So this is meant to be something that is evolving in real time. And we're excited about having that flexibility. And then as far as the new look, we're just hoping that the website is colorful, engaging, draws you in, has a place where we can highlight all the great insight that we got from the youth and young adults in our focus group. And yeah, so we look forward to kind of drawing you into all these different things. So let's take a look at the next slide. Essentially, just our purpose and mission. Our purpose is to create a world where all young people have safety, autonomy, and communities of care. And our mission is to prevent and end homelessness by centering unhoused young people, building collective power, and transforming the landscape of what is possible. So with that, I will pass it on to Aaliyah.
Thanks so much, Katie. I appreciate you also just naming that, several of the negative scores we're seeing are because of violence towards LGBTQ communities. I think that's a really vital point to highlight there. So I'm going to walk us through the research methodology. Tim, you can go to the next slide. Awesome. And I know we've already said this, but I just want to emphasize the first step in creating, right, this revamped state index was to take direction from youth and young adults themselves. So again, thank you to everyone who took part in this portion of our research. Your insight is incredibly valuable and literally shaped what you see today. So to get feedback from youth and young adults, we organized 7 focus groups with currently and formerly unhoused youth and young adults. Each group focused on a different identity or interaction with an oppressive system, and I'll talk more about that soon here. So 26 folks participated in our focus groups in total. Regardless of which focus group they participated in, we emphasized the importance of intersectionality and asked folks to show up as their full, authentic selves. Each group met on Zoom for about 90 minutes, and we compensated each participant $100. Every session started with the question, what does housing liberation look and feel like to you? We asked open-ended questions throughout related to the theme of each group and took detailed notes on what participants experienced while navigating youth homelessness systems, including barriers and supports. As a best practice for safety and confidentiality, we did not record the Zoom calls. We instead quoted or paraphrased as exact as possible, and then followed up to confirm each participant's consent for attribution, received edits and approval for their paraphrased quotes, and confirmed consent for use of those quotes throughout the index website and relaunch. I wanted to be really detailed about this process of authentic youth engagement because it matters, right? As we are amplifying youth voice, we also need to make sure it's authentic and it's safe and it's inclusive for how different folks are feeling being involved, right? So after finishing all of the focus groups, we went through our notes and created metric categories based on common themes that we saw. And I know Katie mentioned a few, and I'll mention a few more soon here. So after we, pulled those direct quotes to inform our understanding of what reform and transformation could look like, Katie and Jeremy began the process of drafting new metrics. So taking the issues raised and converting them into policies, legal rights, and legal protections. Once those initial draft metrics were written, myself and Udaris reviewed and gave general feedback, noting additional perspectives, ideas, and other metrics we thought were important to include. And after the metrics were complete, a team of pro bono attorneys researched the relevant statutes, regulations, and policies. We then, did a final review and then started to score. You can go to the next slide, Tim. So I think it's important here to walk through what each of our focus groups were and what that means, right? So first, we have system impacts of youth and young adults. This is inclusive of personal experiences with criminal, immigration, child welfare, protective services, and foster care systems, and those who are impacted by these systems via a family member. So for example, an incarcerated parent. We then had Black and Brown youth and young adults for youth and young adults who identify as Black or Brown, undocumented for youth and young adults without legal immigration status, trans, non-binary, and intersex youth and young adults. This was inclusive of all non-cisgender identities and expressions, including those who are intersex and or have differences in sex development. Youth and young adults with disabilities, inclusive of all disabilities, including but not limited to physical and mental disabilities. Parenting youth and young adults, for youth and young adults who are themselves parents, inclusive of those who do not have physical and or legal custody of their children. Youth who experience or have experienced domestic violence or abuse, inclusive of all forms of domestic violence, including but not limited to physical, verbal, emotional, and sexual and violence abuse, inclusive of violence and abuse committed by any all members of the household. And I also want to mention a couple things that are not on this slide. We are also working with the National Indigenous Women Resource Center to organize focus groups with Indigenous youth and young adults. Many of our current metrics will be relevant, right? But we do want to create a tribal index and be really pointed in that effort. And I will also mention that we also want to have a focus group with service providers and advocates in the future to capture additional metrics and perspectives that perhaps we don't have yet. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So a few of the common themes that we saw come up that were already mentioned is accessing and maintaining safe and habitable housing. That was a thread that ran through all of the groups, as was experiencing discrimination in housing and services, the detrimental effect of homelessness and poverty on mental health, and the additional trauma of navigating nonprofit and government systems were also common themes. So again, these common themes guide our overall categorization of metrics, which we will spend time going into when we overview the website. You can go to the next slide. So as Katie and I have both mentioned, right, we included quotes across the index website. And again, this is so important to emphasize. We wanted to transform and update the index to recenter it on the experiences, needs, and policy demands of unhoused youth and young adults as they navigate the webs of systems and laws that currently affect their lives. So we intentionally included direct quotes from youth and young adults across the new website to emphasize the importance of authentic youth engagement and collaboration in this work. We believe that youth and young adults should be included and contribute to all local and national dialogues about ending youth homelessness. And the direct quotes used across this website showcase our commitment to updating the index to recenter it on the experiences, needs, and policy demands of unhoused youth and young adults. So you'll see on every metric category page, there is a quote from a youth and young adult so that you can see how we saw this issue and we turned it into a metric. We really want to emphasize how important youth and young adult voice is in this work, and take time to really sit and savor on these quotes. They're impactful. They're just incredibly important. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Jeremy to talk a bit about theory of change and scoring.
Thank you, Aaliyah. So we, for the purposes of the new state index, wanted to make sure that we had everything on correctly. In other words, we wanted to make sure that we had our theory of change about what we were doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to go about creating change based on the metrics and policies that we've now started to track. The structure that we've developed for our theory of change and our scoring is very much inspired and based on Away Home America's New Deal to End Youth Homelessness. I strongly recommend it as a resource. It was instrumental in enabling us to craft what this state index has become. And I'm really excited for what comes next as we sort of fold our work in tandem with the larger national movement. Right now, and this is very much open to change as we receive input and feedback from young people themselves, we have 4 key principles that guide our theory of change. The first is that impoverishment and oppression drive youth homelessness, and that because these systems work to prop each other up, we have to get rid of all of them in order to get rid of any one of them. The second is that youth homelessness is a housing problem. Solving it will require the decommodification of most housing, along with the construction of new housing and the upkeep of the housing that does exist. The third is that effective advocacy needs to diminish and not strengthen the systems that cause youth homelessness. And the fourth is that laws need to balance young people's need for care with the acknowledgement of their personhood and respect for their autonomy. Next slide, Tim, if you'd be so kind. Thank you. So this is definitely where we drew really heavily on Away Home America's New Deal to End Youth Homelessness. We've structured a new scoring system. I believe Katie mentioned this earlier. We had an old model where it was really just yes or no, right? Does this policy exist? Does it not? And it really left no room for nuance, and it left no room for where policies are themselves actually harmful. Everything was sort of just grayed out and blurred, and everything was mushed together. And what we've done is it's not that innovative, but for us, it's exciting to implement finally to the world, is an actual points-based scoring system, where we are saying, okay, you get negative points, you get no points, you get positive points. And we have sort of 7 rungs on this ladder, and I'll go from negative to positive because I like to move in that direction. So the worst category that we have, which is -1 point, is violent. And that's policies that cause harm to unhoused young people and that are malicious. A step up from that, which is -0.5 points, is the category of harmful, and those are policies that aren't necessarily malicious, but that cause harm to unhoused young people. And so the maliciousness is the factor in what qualifies something as violent. And an example of this for us is that the wave of anti-trans legislation that has been really intentionally and cruelly targeting folks over the last couple of years, that's not just harmful, that's violent. 0 points is status quo. It's a policy that doesn't actually reduce harm to unhoused young people, or in situations where we're actually measuring against A positive policy, it's when we haven't been able to find record of a policy on the books for a particular thing. So in the context of, for example, an enforceable right to housing, if a state doesn't have one on the books, then that's no law found, that's status quo. Harm reduction is plus 0.5 points. That's when a policy reduces harm to unhoused young people if it's effectively implemented, but the policy reinforces the systems that cause youth homelessness while doing so. Plus 1 point is reformist. Policies reduce youth homelessness if they're effectively implemented, but the policy relies on the systems that cause youth homelessness, even if they're not themselves reinforcing it. Transformative edge, plus 1.5. The policy undermines the systems that cause youth homelessness, but it doesn't directly prevent or end youth homelessness. And a step past that, transformative, and this is where a lot of the like best stuff that we have in the New State Index is plus 2 points. And it's policies that prevent or end youth homelessness. And that's either by themselves or in conjunction with other metrics if they're effectively implemented. And you may have noticed I've been adding that language to a number of these, if effectively implemented. And that's because the next steps for us are not just expanding the metrics that we're tracking. It's not just adding new features to the website. It's actually taking a step further and saying what is happening on the ground. What is the actual implementation for all of these metrics in all of these jurisdictions, so that we know, oh, we're giving you points because you have a law in the books, but you're not implementing it. And that could be funding, that could be administrative and executive obstinance or inattentiveness. There are a lot of reasons, but we're excited to dig into that piece of it as well. Now that I've walked you through theory of change and scoring, I will pass it back to Katie, who is going to actually start the tour of our new website. Katie, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you. So I will wait for it to get loaded here. All right. So I'd like to actually start, I think, obviously this website, you can pour through it and look at the homepage, which kind of features different like pieces and parts of the rest of the site. But what I really think is the thing I want to prioritize today is making sure you all understand how to use the policy maps. So if we go to policy maps and hover over, you can see we've got an option to click overall policy score. We're going to go there first. Oh, oh no. Okay, shoo. I was like, that's not great for launch of your website if they're like, nope, it's not going to work. Okay. So on overall youth homelessness policy score, I first just kind of want to walk through like the structure of the pages, and a lot of them are very similar sort of in their structure. So um, we usually try to include some paragraph of instructions at the top of each page, just so that you kind of understand what you're looking at, you can understand how to use it and what the features are. So here, this is our overall youth homelessness policy score map. If you hover over any of the states, you can see the score for that state. We've also got kind of a color scheme going here from dark orange to dark blue. And you can see below, like on the legend, where it just shows, what the score range is that each color represents. One thing I do want to mention, I forgot to say it before, is that the colors that we chose for the map were chosen with accessibility in mind. We wanted to sort of avoid like the red to blue, just in the sense of like it looking too close to like a political visualization. But there's a reason that red to blue often works, or can also be tricky, is because of sort of color blindness issues. And so sort of this gradient of blue and orange seems to read well for that. So that's something that we're always open to feedback on. So if anyone has that issue and wants to give us comments on it, please feel free. Anyway, so besides sort of this overall policy map, the other thing that's on here are these two buttons, Explore by Policy and Explore by Jurisdiction. We'll start with Explore by Policy. And there's kind of two ways to explore this. Well, let's say three. Tim is doing one, which is you could just scroll through, see something that, catches your interest and go ahead and click on it. The blue little buttons below the text, those represent the categories for each particular metric. Eventually, we're hoping to have category pages so you can kind of do like an analysis of how your particular jurisdiction scores per category. But at this point, they're just text to represent what the categories are. And again, with the same sort of structure of the page, there's instructions at the top that'll help you sort of understand how you can use this page. But let's actually start by doing select category. And I'm going to have Tim click on the drop down for select category, but not click on anything yet. Just kind of keep that open, because one question that came in the chat was sort of about the intersection of like child welfare and homelessness, which is notorious. And the specific question was around the fact of like the state being willing to pay for foster care for youth, but not being willing to provide housing assistance to families. That is the perfect example of a kind of policy that the index will likely track in the very near future. We do not have a robust section yet on child welfare type metrics. We're calling it child and family services as a more sort of umbrella term for the types of policies that might match the question in the chat. What we're going to probably focus on in the index is where it's a very direct connection to like family homelessness leading to a child being in foster care. However, child welfare in general, there are a lot of people who are more focused on and experts in that system that I'm hoping once we work out sort of this child and family services, we direct folks to those experts rather than us trying to, do it part way on our website. We're going to do the ones that we feel like are directly connected to youth and young adult homelessness, and then try to direct people to other resources. One, I would say that's really important to point out, Chapin Hall has been doing a lot of research on how housing interventions can prevent children from ending up in the child welfare system, as well as preventing children from ending up homeless. And then there's a couple other resources as well that eventually we'll share on the website once we have that built out. Anyway, let's actually go though to search by category for something we do have a lot of, and that is around education policy and homeless youth. So if you select a category, then you're going to get all of our metrics that fall under education. I think just as an example, we'll look at tuition and fees exemptions for unhoused students. And so if we click on that, you're going to, again, get a very similar structure, although this time at the top, we don't necessarily have instructions. Instead, we have metric-specific information. So some of this is more built out than others. Like some of it is a bit of a placeholder text, or it's the metric in and of itself is pretty self-explanatory. But we're going to include some information about the metric. Then you're going to have our policy map. And if we scroll down, we can see sort of the legend for that particular map. Like Jeremy mentioned, status quo in this case is no law found, basically that there's nothing having to do with tuition and fees that we could find in that state. We have harm reduction metric where they allow unhoused students to have in-state tuition, going all the way up to what we're calling a transformative edge type metric, where the jurisdiction completely exempts unhoused students from paying tuition and fees. So that's sort of the scoring range that we have for this particular map. It doesn't tell you too many details in the legend, but if you really want to get into the details, what you're going to want to do is click on the bibliography. Now, the bibliography is where we're going to cite specifically the law and then a summary of that law for each state that might have a particular law that matches a metric. So hopefully this is something that you would find useful if you really need those further details about a particular metric. Like I said, we will let you know when these are updated. Right now, the last update is September 2023. As we go through this legislative session, more updates are going to be coming in, and we'll be sure to update the date once we get those updates in. So we can go back to the tuition and fee exemption. I should also mention, I think Tim was doing it, but if you hover over each state, you can find the score for this particular metric rather than the overall score. And then I just want to highlight one more thing is if you scroll to the bottom, we actually have category. Well, first of all, we have explore related metrics. So this is sort of a way if you just want to kind of get to other education metrics without having to go back to explore by policy, you could click on explore related metrics. But we also have at the bottom category specific information. Why is this something that we think is important to track on a state index for youth homelessness? And then below that, we actually have a link to, if there is available, a model statute for this particular category. And I'll go over more information about the model statutes in a bit, but I wanted to point that out here. So let's go back up, and Tim is using the little trick of there's a orange arrow that shows up if you're at the bottom of the page, and you can just click that and it should take you back to the top. If you click on Explore by Policy again, another way that you can use this is to use the search bar. And I was going to do search by minor, M-I-N-O-R, in the sense that that's going to pop up for youth laws that are going to apply to youth who are under 18, assuming that that's the age of majority. Some states have a slightly higher age of majority. So in this particular case, again, it's going to pop up all the metrics that have the word minor in it. We could take a look maybe at minors have a right to privacy and healthcare, just to kind of get a sense of a different map. Again, we have our metric specific information, we have our map, and then we have the legend that helps us understand, what is going on in that particular state. You can click on the bibliography to get the specifics. This particular metric falls under healthcare and autonomy for youth. And so we have a healthcare category information and autonomy information, as well as the model statutes below. Okay, so now let's move on to searching by, oh, and actually, great question that came up in the Q&A, and this is a good time to mention it. We will be including the US territories. You can see right now on all the maps, they're grayed out, and that's because we don't have data for them yet. But we are working on that actively to get that going, and eventually they will be included. And actually, that is a reason. So as we go to this next piece, explore by jurisdiction, there's a reason we say jurisdiction rather than state, is because we're inclusive of the territories and, of course, like the District of Columbia. So you could search by jurisdiction this way. You could click on explore by jurisdiction, find your state or territory, but we're going to close that out for now and just instead do, if you click on basically any state from any of the maps, you can go to the jurisdiction specific page. So we're going to go to Texas. And so if you click on Texas from any of the maps, it'll take you essentially to this page where we have the fact sheet information. So again, at the top, we have some instructions there. But what I'll have Tim do is actually just click on the View State Fact Sheet. Originally, we were hoping to visualize this information on the website rather than, pushing you to a Google Sheet. But as you can see, like as Tim is scrolling through, we do have over 100 things that we're scoring. And so it's a little bit hard to visualize that in a easy to view way. So we're sort of rethinking what we might want to visualize on that page. We probably will have a visualization for the overall score. You can see here at the bottom, total score, Texas is scoring 5.5 out of 94.5. While we're down there at the bottom, I might as well sort of let you know about some of these metrics at the very bottom where it says like democratization, decriminalization, et cetera. Those are like state or jurisdiction environment type scores that we're sort of weighting the score by a couple points up or down. Basically, democratization would be like the voting laws that are in that particular state, ensuring that they are not doing things that create discrimination in voting. Decriminalization, that's specifically around decriminalization of homelessness. So making sure that like if the state is criminalizing homelessness, they're going to get dinged a point. Progressive taxation, that would essentially mean like, what does the state's tax policy look like? Do people of low incomes, are they paying a higher percentage of taxes than people with higher incomes? If so, they're going to get dinged a point like Texas is here. And immigration enforcement, that's essentially whether or not the state goes beyond what is required to enforce the federal immigration laws. And this is something that we included because anytime a state, if you think that if you try to access services in that state, it's going to put you at risk of interaction with immigration authorities, you're probably not going to seek those services. And so for us, we're going to, for states that are very clear about not doing that, they could get an extra half a point. For states that are essentially acting as federal immigration enforcement agents, they're going to lose a point. On our scoring tab, which I'll show you later, it kind of explains where we get that data from and how we decide on those scores. But anyway, let me explain the jurisdiction fact sheet. So on the left, we have the category, column A. Column B, we have the subcategory. Then we have our metrics in column C, and each metric is linked to its bibliography from here. So this is another way where you can access that bibliography and check the information. Then in column D, we have the actual score, and then in column D, we have the maximum score for that metric. The little X's that you see, those are metrics that are really, really important to us and that we want to release data and scores as soon as possible, but we're still waiting for some research on those. So those will be added in once we get them. But again, this is just a way that you can see like how your jurisdiction scored on each metric. We are always open to feedback. So if you see that there is you get a point for something or you don't get a point for something and you think that you should, we want to hear about it. You can email us at index@homelesslaw.org and let us know if you think there is a mistake or if you think that we scored things incorrectly based on how your state is. You can kind of see here just along the bottom, I'll just point out, since it's taking you to this Google Sheet, you could go between different states right from here too as well. Like you could click on any tab and check out the data for another state. All right, let's go back to the Texas page. The other thing I wanted to point out that we have here is just some youth homelessness data. This is mostly pulled from HUD, so you know that that's going to be a undercount, if anything. But we wanted to include it because eventually we would like to be able to include youth homelessness data into the index scoring. Like, are these policies of states who have a lot of these policies, are they actually seeing reductions in youth homelessness? Maybe it's for a particular age group, maybe it's under 18, maybe it's for young adults. So we're just tracking these things for now and including them as a resource. I will note that this is 2022 data. I have the 2023 data and will be making sure this is updated soon accordingly. But it's still some interesting information for folks to have on hand. We are also open in the future, like if your state does a really good job of data around youth homelessness, we would want to know that and we'd want to include that information on this page as well. Okay, let's take a look at some of the other sections of the website. So if we go to, let's say about, and let's go to the research framework. I just wanted to point out this page because if you're curious about how we decided on these metrics or got to a particular score, this is where you would go. We have our methodology, our theory of change, and I think the thing I most want to just show you for now is scoring. That's going to tell you the scoring definitions, and it's going to give you information below in those boxes about those weighted environmental scores that we discussed at the bottom, like the progressive taxation, where we get that data from and why. The other thing I really want to point out here is the authentic youth engagement page or tab, which you can either get to from, there's multiple ways to get to it. You can get to it from resources. You can get to it from the research framework page. Hopefully it will, it's because we're on the page. So if you scroll down a little bit, there it is. It popped up, authentic youth engagement and collaboration. Just some tips and resources that we found helpful in regard to that. But what I really want to point out is at the bottom of this, we're including quotes from the youth in our focus groups, which I found every single one to be really helpful and invaluable as we have gone through this process. So you can take some time to look through those when you can. So let's go back to the top, and I want to point out under resources 2 other things. So let's click on legal help. One thing we really wanted to integrate onto the website was information about how youth can actually access legal services if they are having trouble, realizing any of these rights or policies that they're seeing on the State Index website. We have kind of a map, a colorful map that shows like how many providers are in each state based on the color. But mostly we are sort of interested in people getting to the information this way so we can track how many people are looking for legal services in a particular state. So if you do click on a state, like for instance, if we click on Washington State, it will take you to a page that will explain to you what types of youth-specific legal aid providers there are in the state and what kind of services are offered. So this is something like, please do not hesitate to use it. This is, to share this resource. We want to make sure that young people know that this is available. If we go back to the legal help page on the website, the other thing I want to say is that our partner, Kelly Russo at the American Bar Association, is very serious about if you try to use this resource, if you try to get a youth legal help through one of these services and you're not able to, or if there is not a legal aid provider in your state, or you're just in general having trouble, she wants to hear from you. So there's a little email HYLN or call HYLN. That is a serious instruction. Like she really wants to know and she will help with referrals if need be. So let's scroll back up to the top and take a look at the model statutes under resources. So as I mentioned, there are model statutes linked from the various metric-specific map pages. And here we have them all in one place. So you can look and see, like, yeah, if you're looking for employment-related metrics or family law-related, model statutes, this is where you will find it. And so what we've done is we've got, the types of model statutes on the side. We've got a little blurb about what, that particular statute covers. And if you click on Learn More, it'll actually open up that specific chapter of the model statute book, which again was another partnership with the ABA, American Bar Association, that came out this year, also with a very sort of purposeful and intensive youth engagement work. So that is a resource. Please feel free to use it in your advocacy. So let's go back up to the top. The only other thing I really want to point out for now is the under the About tab, let's go to the Movement to End Youth Homelessness. One thing that I realized when I started this job at the law center was that it was hard to sort of get a grasp of like what all the different national organizations involved in youth homelessness, like what were their priorities, what were they doing, where was their gaps. And so what we actually did here was started to compile sort of the various advocacy priorities of the different national organizations. So you could scroll through here, you'll see the different national organizations, what they're currently working on, links to each of those organizations if you want to get involved with any of those policy priorities. Those are things that we can, that we're trying to compile on this page. The other thing I would say all the way to the bottom of the page, we include some of like the research organizations that we really depend on often when we're trying to do like a deeper dive on some of these policies. So we have those there as well. If there is, and I'll just say, yeah, and then at the bottom there's a couple blog posts where eventually we'll have a separate link to the blog where that will be a place where like, if there's major updates to the website, we'll, explain them there. We'll also be able to, do a deeper dive on some of the metrics. Like for instance, for us at the Law Center, like we are really determined to create a right to housing in this country. What it will take to get there policy-wise is a lot of different things. And so one thing I'm going to start exploring this year on the blog is just like what it would mean to decommodify housing in this country, meaning like housing is no longer something that we do for profit. It's something that it's just a place you live. So that is something that I'll be exploring on the blog later. And I'm excited for some of the other contributors to do that too. I'm just going to very briefly, since we're running out of time and I see some folks have to go, and that's great. We're so glad you were able to join us. Just to say some of the things that are coming soon that I haven't already mentioned. One thing that we're going to have eventually is a form to submit metric ideas. So if you're looking at the metrics and be like, we're doing something really awesome in our state and we feel like that should be tracked on the index, or we have an idea for something really awesome in our state and that should be tracked, because we certainly are taking things like there's a lot of, 2-point transformative type metrics that do not exist in any state at this point. So we will take those, your wild and lovely ideas, and do the research to see if we can track it as a metric. The other thing is just the live tracking. There will eventually, I think, be a separate live tracking tab at the top of the website. And that will be a way where you can go and actually see like bills that are going through in the various states that actually relate to the index metrics. So you'll be able to kind of see in real time what's going on and whether those bills are passing or failing. Okay, I think that covers it for my section. I'm going to pass it on now to Erica.
Thanks so much, Katie. So I just want to point out that eventually we will also have a events and webinars page that will link directly to all of our previous webinars on the state index, including this one. So that will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and feed directly from the website. So keep an eye out for that. And you can visit our Connect with Us page by clicking the big yellow Contact Us button that's on the top right of any page that you are currently on. And this will tell you which one of our team members to reach out to for your various comments, any corrections you may have, questions, requests. I'm also asking if anybody wants to potentially be a panelist in one of our upcoming webinars. You can reach out to me with that as well. So definitely make use of that page. And Kelly Russo's information is on there again as well. So please reach out to her if you have anything in regards to the ABA or the Homeless Youth Legal Network. You can go to the next slide. And please be sure to also follow us on all of our social medias for the Law Center and True Colors United. This is truly a joint project with both of us. And that'll help you stay in the know about what we have coming up, whether it be webinars, new blog posts, additional information that's been posted to the website. So please be sure to follow us on all of those. Also, if you would like to subscribe for updates directly to your email, you can add your email in the portion at the bottom of any of the pages to subscribe for those news and updates. Next, you're going to hear from my colleague, John Salois. He's our youth shelter and housing attorney, and he has an invitation for his upcoming webinar that's happening later this month.
Hi, everyone. My name, like Erica says, my name's John Salois. I'm the youth shelter and housing attorney here at the National Homelessness Law Center. Just a little about me quickly. I've been working in youth homelessness with youth experiencing homelessness for well over a decade now. I founded the Homeless Youth Law Clinic in Portland, Oregon in 2012. And after that, I worked in Seattle, Washington as well at the Legal Counsel for Youth and Children. And just want to follow up on something Katie said about an hour ago, actually, but something she said about, in her intro is you tend to see similar cases when you're on the ground. I mean, as I'm sure a lot of you people on this webinar know. And one of the things you see a lot is youth sort of, they come into shelter and then they're terminated from shelter. And then there's sort of the cycle that happens. And so this is the question I've been researching since coming to the National Homelessness Law Center. What are the rights of youth who are in shelter? And when we say shelter, we mean emergency shelter. We mean transitional living programs. We need host homes, maternity group homes. Really, any supportive housing is what we mean. And what we mean is, what are the rights of youth? If someone is going to be terminated back into homelessness, what rights does a youth have? Can they dispute that decision, right? Can they have a hearing on the decision? Can they appeal that decision? Can they have someone who wasn't part of the first decision have a neutral arbiter in the decision? So that's we've been researching this quite a bit over the past couple months. And we're having a webinar here on February 29th at 2 p.m. We'll be presenting some of the law, and we'll also be presenting some case examples. We want to make it a little more interactive as well. So hopefully you'll come and join us. We'd love to see you there. And that's all for me. Hopefully we'll see you on February 29th.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. And we will be sure to make sure we're blasting out that registration link once we have it very soon. It'll go out to however you heard about this webinar. You should hear about that webinar the same way. So thank you so much for being here. We are really excited. This is sort of our first experiment of doing like a later East Coast time, earlier Pacific time, and hopefully accommodating for some of our Hawaii friends. So, you could also let us know that feedback of if this sort of time worked for you. But again, that email address is index@homelesslaw.org. That's where we want to hear from you about all the things. So thank you again for being here, and good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.